Welcome to Email After Hours by SenderScore, powered by Validity.
We're your hosts. My name is Guy Hanson.
And I'm Danielle Gallant, and this is Email After Hours. Listeners, we've got a new term for you today, and that is anti-best practices, or anti-best practices, maybe if you're Guy. Today's episode is all about uncovering the strategies that seem promising on the surface, but can derail your email marketing efforts in ways that you might not expect. We'll explore why these tactics continue to lure marketers in and the misconceptions that keep them alive in the industry.
That's right. And joining us today is someone we have known for years. It's such an overdue pleasure to welcome Matt Vernhout, Principal Email Advisor for Email Industries. He's a seasoned expert in email deliverability and marketing strategies, and has witnessed firsthand the many pitfalls marketers face when they stray away from those established best practices. Exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to the show, Matt. Great to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. You're right. I think it's been way too long. We've known each other for well over a decade and a half, almost two, probably. Here we are.
Took you 2 decades to get on Email After Hours now.
Better late than never, right?
And we are going to start, as we usually do, with a bit of an icebreaker question. This one I think we can probably all relate to. We all have those really rocky moments, usually early in our careers, that make us laugh and maybe for me, cringe when we look back. So Matt, what's one mistake that you made early on in the world of email with the rules of email that still makes you laugh or maybe shake your head when you think about it?
I mean, the list is pretty long, I think. Actually today, of all days, today marks my 24th anniversary starting in email marketing. I started 24 years ago, the day after Canadian Thanksgiving, which is today by the date. So oddly enough, I have a lot of them. I think one of them, way back, I was probably in the industry less than a year, and I was working the midnight shift in the network operations center for, I don't know if it was still Flow Network at the time, or maybe DoubleClick had bought us at the time. That's how far back this is going, back when DoubleClick did email before they just did ads. And there was a client that I'd had problems with over and over again. And I was not the tech support guy. I was supposed to be running the network, make sure that servers were up and things were going on. But occasionally I would troubleshoot client issues. This client had the same issue every Tuesday night, like clockwork. And I'd fix it every Tuesday night. And I would tell them, clone this campaign next week. And they would ignore it. And they would clone the broken one again and again. And one day I was really busy. I had a laundry list of things I had to do. And I replied back to an email, not realizing the customer was on it, with basically, too busy, sorry, can't help, call somebody else. Didn't realize the customer was on the call, on the email. Needless to say, I was not very well received by the account manager, by my boss, by the client, by several other people. But it was a learning experience to pay real close attention to who's in the CC line when you're replying to an email. That one stuck with me I guess it still sticks with me.
You have to craft your own personal oops.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wouldn't worry. I think we've all sat on that email naughty step at least once in our lives, that's for sure. Anyhow, into today's conversation, let's start by defining exactly what we mean by anti-best practices. I think we've all had at some point what seemed like a really great idea, only to find that there were actually some pretty good reasons that it wasn't. And that's what we mean by anti-best practices. For instance, using misleading subject lines, by adding RE in front of them. Might seem like a really clever tactic to boost open rates, but it often leads to some really severe reputation damage. So, Matt, can you walk us through a real-world example where this tactic backfired and explain what those markets were hoping for versus what actually happened?
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch. Misleading subject lines are just the most obvious, right? Because everyone's chasing an open rate. And, RE, FW, and the subject line, those ones are just, they boggle my mind, especially forward, right? Because someone is trying to basically say like, oh, you missed this, or hey, you might like this. And I've actually seen that come through where they take like a full email or what looks like an email and a forward, and then they tag a basic plain text message at the top that says, oh, I thought about you when I was reading this, and so I wanted to forward it. But it's just a commercial email that looks like a forward. That is one of those ones that it just sort of sets the wrong tone when you're communicating with somebody, because it's a blatant promotion that they're trying to hide as a personal message. Like, it'd be like me sending you, like, Guy, go read my new blog post. I thought you'd like it. Here's the article, right? Well, I would probably do that anyway, and I'm not selling anything. But the point being, the idea of you're just start with the wrong foot. You're starting with the wrong message. Other ones that are really bad I see all the time is like these hash busters. There's like people out there and they're going to sell you, put this paragraph in the bottom of your email. It'll totally help get your message delivered to the primary tab at Google, which is great for a week. And then Google says, oh, it's still commercial. They put it back in the promo tab. And then you pay the guy again and he gives you a new subject, new hash busting block. And you do it again, and then you wash, rinse, repeat. And it becomes a very expensive process because people are trying to game the system. And honestly, the Google people are really smart. They know that it's a promo, and they're going to put it in the promo tab. And you can hash bust all you want to try to get back in the primary tab, but you're just going to run in circles. You might do it for a short period of time, and then you're going to end back in the promo tab. I think there's actually studies that I've seen from a few different places, probably one of them from Validity even, about like commercial messages ending in the promo tab get more complaints, even though they get more open rates. Because people actually want their promos in the promo tab. So running in circles to try to get back into the primary tab is one of those fallacies that sounds like it's a good idea, but in the end, are you actually just hurting yourself? Because people want promos when they're ready for them, not mixed in with their messages from mom.
Well, like any lie, I feel like or forward, like it's diminishing returns, right? Anyway, and I'm sure somewhere along the line, maybe in some country, I don't know, where there's some sort of legal precedent for having to make sure you're being honest with the content. There is something there, right? And I mean, it's just never going to work.
I have yet to see the can spam case or the Castle case that comes out and says in the subject line was misleading for a marketing message. I have yet to see that because, I don't think it's a
girl can dream, Matt. A girl can dream.
I mean, I would say politicians are just as guilty of doing it as marketers, though. If you ever received email from any of the local political parties, a lot of times they will say things like, forward, a message from the leader of the party, right? And it's not it's a commercial message that they're simply trying to send you to make it look like, I got this, it's an insider thing. I wanted to share it with my local constituents. Like, come on. Like, it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess as long as it's working for the politicians, we don't have hope for that can spam.
Right?
That's the case, but I digress. And actually, maybe there's another kind of classic anti-best practice that's maybe a little bit more nuanced and maybe more like actually gamified than just trying to use a deceptive subject line. And that is spam complaint dilution. So this is essentially when a sender tries to game the system by sending really high email volumes so that the spam complaints that come in are diluted as a rate, right? So it doesn't look like their spam complaint rates are super high because they have this monstrous volume to cover it up, essentially. So do you see this often? And then what are the consequences for deliverability?
I mean, often, I wouldn't say I see it often. I certainly see it enough or have seen it over the years where I'll just send more good stuff to dilute the bad stuff. But I think that's when people are using those types of tactics, they know that they're trying to game the system. And honestly, the mailbox providers also know they're trying to game the system, right? So as much as we want to say, like, send really good stuff, like, great, send all the good stuff you want. And actually, to me, that's one of those ones, if you're going to send like 90% good stuff and 10% bad stuff to dilute the complaints, you're still sending 90% good stuff. Let's just try to make it 95% good stuff instead of 90%. So you can educate those customers. But yes, that's one of those ones where I'll just keep sending my really high engagers, or they're using services that are generating artificial engagement. And those are what they're trying to use to boost their placement. So artificial engagement is certainly one of those other tactics that fits in that same sort of genre, right? More clicks, more opens, more engagement, more bots saying not spam. But again, mailbox providers know about those. They know they're happening and they're paying attention to it.
And I'd had a couple of new clients, like pretty much fresh to email deliverability. And I started working with them right in kind of the aftermath of Gmail and Yahoo's 0.3. And we've talked at length on the podcast about that 0.3% complaint rate as like, well, as long as we're beneath that is not really the right mentality anyway for that spam complaint rate. But one of the things that I heard was like, I sent no volume today, but some complaints came in. That doesn't make sense from the math. Like, there's no volume sent, so there should be no ratio here. And I'm just like, I love the strategic, like, mathematical approach to this. It's just not going to work that way.
Well, and mail takes sometimes weeks or days to deliver. I would say weeks, but like several hours at any rate. So if you send at 10:30 at night and your mail takes 4 hours to deliver, a portion of it delivered today and portions of it delivered tomorrow. So you're going to get complaints. The other part is people delay when they read email. That's the beauty of it. It waits for you. It's not social media. It doesn't just scroll by and is gone forever. It waits in your inbox. And if it's in your inbox and I don't read it for 3 days and I report it as spam, guess what? It still counts as a complaint. Whether you sent me mail that day or not, it still counts as a complaint. And in fact, that's maybe worse because that's a day where you're not sending mail and all of a sudden you've got this stack of complaints that come in. Or you deliver very low volume of mail, but people are catching up. So you got a huge stack of complaints.
Exactly.
And it tips the balance. And that's why I also think mailbox providers don't look at your daily stat. They're looking at a week, a month, 2 months, whatever those stats are, and they're trending an average over that period of time.
That's right. I mean, I was doing some complaints analysis last week on a big daily deal sender, and they were getting complaints from campaigns they'd sent back in 2022. So there's a long tail.
How useful are those, though, really, right? That's somebody cleaning out their inbox and just reporting everything
that's right.
from everything 2 years old or more. Spam.
In a similar vein, we often see senders, using the tactic of basically a dedicated IP address to send solely to a specific mailbox provider like Gmail or Comcast, especially if they're trying to sort out a troublesome reputation there. So why is this not a good idea? And what are some of the potential consequences that make it problematic?
Well, there's two thoughts. One, there's actually platforms out there that enable this type of thing, right? So if we're going to say that this is a problem, there's platforms out there that enable the idea of segmentation by mailbox provider, whether you want to send your Gmail stream through ESPA, your Comcast stream through ESPB. There's platforms out there that do this on purpose, right? The challenge with that becomes, what do you do when you pollute that IP? You just move to another ESP and do the same thing and pollute and then do it again and pollute. And that becomes one of those, you're not actually fixing a problem. You're just moving a problem consistently from ISP to IP or from platform to platform. I've always found it to be highly suspicious, right? When I worked at the most recent ESP that I worked at, if a client was only sending to one domain, chances are they were doing it just to send spam. They weren't sending permission mail. They were doing it in a way that they could try to hide in another network and send mail. But you should always have a mix of traffic, because even if you think you're only sending to one or one mailbox provider from that, most mailbox providers host mail across a whole bunch of domains. I think Google is now like 8 million domains or something like that. They're hosting mail. Yahoo is another like 10, 20,000 or more. So you might think you're only sending mail stream to one, but only works if you're saying like only this domain. But then you're missing out on mail that you're potentially sending from other sources into that same network, because you're not looking at MX value, or MX value is hidden, but it's still being managed. So the mailbox providers also know that you're trying to game the system by doing these things. So I think a lot of people think they're smarter than mailbox providers, and think they're smarter than spam filters and things like that. But honestly, there are dedicated teams of people that are exponentially smarter, combined knowledge when it comes to combating these types of bad behaviors. It works. All of these are short-term success tactics. And that's the challenge, right? Is short-term success does not lead to long-term profitability.
Maybe if you say it, Matt, our listeners will believe us. I mean, honestly, I think it is interesting when these questions come in, right? And I think one of the questions is like, well, how would Gmail know possibly that I'm the only one? And it's just like, there are these nuances, right? You just can't see. And what happens at MOG stays at MOG, but we do not want to promote any of these anti-best practices for sure. But one of the things, to your point, Matt, a lot of senders, marketers think like they have outsmarted the mailbox providers or the filtering companies or whoever it might be. And there are some cases where there's like a natural inclination for the marketer to go on the offensive or get defensive rather than tackle these root causes. And one of the most common scenarios I've seen that play out in is when they find themselves, their IP or their domain, on a block list. This is probably not the response that we want to use when we try to remove ourselves from this block list, really anyone. But how does this response and that defensiveness like impact the sender's chances of actually resolving the issue and becoming delisted?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, how do I want to say this in a way? It's not my fault type feeling when someone does get blocklisted. Well, it's not my fault. They're being mean. They're saying I'm doing bad things. But if you actually start digging into the data, yeah, you're probably doing bad things, right? Or you're not following best practices. You're getting too many complaints. You're not hygiening your data. There was a book written a while ago, The Rebel's Guide to Email Marketing. I don't know if you've ever read it, but
nope, I'm going to.
one of the chapters talks about like, when is it okay to buy a list? Right. And it actually goes into the idea of like, there's a very niche audience that you could potentially buy a list and have some success with. I don't necessarily disagree with that. You could buy super niche lists of 100, 200 people that are in market for your product right now because they went to a trade show and you were there. Okay. It might work. But again, it's going to be a short-term thing. It's not going to be a long-term, but it's also likely very expensive. It likely leads to bad things down the line. It's likely a very short-term engagement. Would I ever say like go out B2B or B2C and buy that million CD? No, never. Because we know that tactic doesn't work. But what they were saying, like, you buy this really tiny little list from a trade show in your local hometown and you're offering flowers for a wedding. Okay, well, guess what? Everyone that went to the wedding show is there for a wedding. Guess what? They probably want flowers for their wedding. But as soon as their wedding's over, they never want to hear from you again. Right? So maybe there's some of these like best practices that we've always touted, like don't do these things. Little oddball edge cases occasionally maybe work. But again, short-term tactics, not long-term goals, right? And again, probably lots of complaints, right? So again, you're chasing this. And one of those other ones would be like rotating domain names, right? That's one. I just keep buying new domain names and churning them out as I get blocked. Oh, blocked again, new domain name, right? That goes back to that same tactic you were talking about. Like, so you get blocked, then what? You just change your domains, you change whatever. That's one of those things that a lot of people say, yeah, that's a viable tactic. I'll just keep buying domain name. But is it a viable tactic long-term? Or is it just a headache for people?
It's not a viable tactic to reach out to a mailbox provider that's blocked you or a block list and say, you're being mean. Please let me off your
Absolutely.
list.
Right? The other key word to never mention is my lawyers will contact you, because then they will stop helping you completely until your lawyers actually contact them. Because they're going to basically say, great, you can talk to my lawyers. Right? That's a key word you never want to mention when you're talking to a block list provider. Lawyer.
Almost certainly not. But you've almost preempted my next question, Matt, because...
Uh-oh.
No, but I mean, think about another aspect of that defensiveness. I think we have seen email marketers who are so desperate that they've resorted to threatening legal action when they feel they've been unfairly treated by mailbox providers or filtering companies. I think we saw the situation a while back where one of the political parties tried to sue Gmail for junking their emails. So what else? You got any other anecdotes you can share with us along these lines? And does it ever yield the desired results?
Yeah. Another one from back in 5 era, I was working with a very large advertiser who continuously got blocked at Microsoft. Like, get them unblocked, they get blocked. Get them unblocked, they get blocked. Get them unblocked, they get blocked. And eventually they said, well, can't we just talk with Microsoft Direct? And I said, sure, I'll see what I can do. So I arranged a call, and I had the head of anti-spam filtering from Microsoft on the call. I had the client on the call, and I basically said, I'm only here to moderate the conversation, introduction, go forth. And the customer said, okay, great. Well, I've got my ad representative here from the Microsoft Ad Network, and we spend a ton of money with Microsoft, and we would like you to stop blocking our email. And the Microsoft team basically said, yeah, I don't care what you spend with them. They're a completely different company from us, right? We might have the same umbrella, but we're a completely different company, different P&Ls, everything. Nothing you spend with them impacts me at all. And so I think they went on mute for 2-3 minutes and came back and said, okay, well, so our ad rep left because apparently I think that person had said, we can fix this. We're all the same company. We can fix this. Only to find out that it wasn't going to be that easy. And then the question came down to, so what do we need to do to fix the problem? And the team at Microsoft said, just listen to everything Matt's told you. Thanks very much. And they hung up the phone. That was the end of the call.
To be a fly on the wall during that muted part of that conversation in that room.
and it was one of those things because like I've spent a lot of time prepping my client for the call. I spent a lot of time prepping the mailbox provider for the call and sort of said, here's what I've told A, here's what I've told B, here's what, so everyone knew where my stance was. And in the end, it came down to, I'd found with both sides, well, at least what the mailbox provider side had found to sort of be a happy medium in regards to, I don't know if they could say we'll be less aggressive, but like we're more agreeable to that tactic than the other. And we made some big changes. We built a preference center. We ended up stopped doing some of the cross promotions that they were doing, which was causing most of the complaints. We stopped doing some of their sort of global opt-in where you'd opt in once and all of a sudden 6 brands are emailing you, things like that. And it actually changed their entire program. It actually made their entire program better because now they're following best practices. They're not getting blocked all the time. They're not continuously having to fight for the inbox placement. It came down to just follow some of these simple best practices around consent, around permission. And consent was never the problem. It was the overarching scope of what they determined to be the consent that they had, which they didn't.
And they're near threats to Microsoft, presumably, that wouldn't have gone over.
I mean, yeah, we'll pull funding. That was never going to happen on either side, I don't think, right? Like, we'll stop buying ads. That was never going to happen. They needed to buy those ads anyways, but it was certainly a challenge to get them to understand. And I think that's where, like companies like Email Industries, even companies like Validity have an opportunity to be that independent third party and have that point of view to say, like, you're both being unreasonable. We can find a happy middle ground. Or the rules are the rules. You have to play. Yeah, they're probably the hardest mailbox provider to have good, solid consistency with because they seem to be the most aggressive when it comes to certain filtering. And they also have the smart screen technology, which has a habit of just deleting mail. So you don't know what happened to it. Microsoft accepts it. Then it gets eaten somewhere in the machine. And then nobody knows what happens to it. So there's certainly some peculiarities and some uniqueness to the Microsoft filtering that you don't see elsewhere. Like in Germany, for example, they have to do one of two. They have to bounce it or they have to deliver it by law. It's the only two options. They don't have any other. So they can put it in the spam folder. That's fine. But they have to do one. If they accept it, they have to deliver it somewhere. And if they choose not to accept it, they have to return back an error code that says we're not accepting it for whatever reason. I wish.
Another thing we should add to our wish list.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
And so I think that obviously there are lots of these, right? Like maybe a defensive attitude, maybe trying to game the system through content or even the way that you're leveraging IPs, all of that stuff. But like, why do you think some marketers, many marketers, find themselves drawn to these short-term, often like ineffective solutions? What are part of working with clients and working with senders on this is trying to understand what the underlying misconceptions or biases are that make these approaches seem like a good idea, even when it is pretty well documented that these things don't work. So is it a lack of education? Is it internal pressure? Like, what's your experience with why this still happens?
Time for another podcast on just that alone? So yeah, I think there's several things. One, there's pressure from internal in regards to we need to make our month, our quarter, whatever it happens to be. Depending on the industry, like publishers, for example, are notoriously bad for never wanting to suppress a user unless they've unsubscribed or bounced because they sell ads based on number of subscribers, right? Selling ads on 100,000 subscribers versus 10,000 active subscribers is a big difference when it comes to the revenue you can generate from ad revenue in an email. So a lot of it comes down to commercial reasons. Some of it comes down to education, right? I've been saying for a long time, I've tried to educate myself out of a job as a deliverability professional for several years, but there's always someone new. There's always someone making the same mistake. There's always someone needing help.
I think all of that is spot on. And then, of course, there's just the fact that human beings are naturally wired to follow the route of least resistance as well. So,
well, I think, yeah, Matt, you were generous. Like, as coming from my own background when we were a sender, like, it was sketchy dating sites. Like, it was a relentless game of whack-a-mole about, like, how can we push this even for a day? But it becomes whack-a-mole, right? Like, it just becomes this, it's so ineffectual. But yeah, path of least resistance was definitely my experience.
I think people don't like being called out for their bad behavior in general. So when they do get called out by a block list or a mailbox provider that says, I'm not accepting this because your behavior was bad, they're immediately offended. What do you mean I did something wrong? That's not true. I didn't do anything wrong. Like, they're immediately offended by it. And I think that always puts you on the wrong foot when you're trying to figure out, like, well, what did I do wrong? Oh, did I send to my suppression list when I shouldn't have? Okay, well, that's a problem. But people will be like, oh, well, I just did it. It's only one day. It's fine. Right? It's not necessarily. Or they'll be like, it works so well, I'm going to do it again tomorrow. Right? Like, these people didn't know that they didn't miss me.
So let's finish up on a positive note then. And I think, kind of building on what you were just starting to say, what advice would you give to marketers who are trying really hard to up their game to avoid that elephant trap of anti-best practices? Because it's hard, right? You can often feel like you've got that angel on the one shoulder saying, hey, follow those best practices. And then you've got the little devil on the other going exactly the opposite. So how do we make sure the little angel wins?
I think you can never go wrong starting from a position of consent, right? That's a general life rule. It doesn't just apply to email. You could never go wrong starting with a position from the point of view of consent. If people ask you for messaging, happily send them messaging. If people ask you to stop messaging them, please stop messaging them, right? People are afraid of unsubscribes. I will take 1,000 unsubscribes over one spam complaint every single day of the week. And I think it's just treating people the same way that you want to be treated. And I think that's the other piece. Like, my keynote at the Canadian Email Summit was putting the human back in email, right? And understanding that people are on the receiving end of your messages. And you don't just treat them like another broadcast recipient, like on the radio, where you have no personalization, you have no understanding of what the past engagement these people have had with your brand. But in email, we have all of that. We know what you click on. We know what you're opening. We know what you're looking for. We know what your preferences are. We may even know who you are, where you live, right? We can send you very targeted, very relevant communications until the point of view when you say, please stop sending me stuff. It doesn't mean I want to disengage with your brand. It could just be, I get 18 emails a week from you, and that's just too many. I'd like 3 emails a week from you. Allow people to have that ability to say, send me a weekly instead of a daily. There's some very large retail brands that will send you 10, 15 email a week. I mean, I don't know.
Yes, there are.
I'm not buying that much clothes. Like, I don't need 15 email a week to buy jeans and t-shirts, right? I haven't changed clothing size in like 15 years. I'm not buying a new shirt every other week. So, I mean, understand that there's people that will accept that much email because they're really into it. A lot of your people that you're sending email to don't care. That's why your open rates are suffering. That's why your click-through rates are suffering. That's likely why you're landing in the spam folder from time to time, is because there's a large percentage of people that are like, too much, I don't care today. But on the days that I do care, I'm going to go look for it. And that's where the promo tab, circling all the way back to the beginning of the promo tab makes sense. Don't try to game it, because if you're in my primary tab, chances are I'm going to put you in the promo tab anyways, because I'm going to save it for later. So
yeah, we're going to drag you. We're going to tab you.
That's right. I'm going to put you in that tab. But I think starting from consent, respect your consumers, understand that there's a human being on the other end, and that if all you're doing is talking to them about your latest discount, chances are at some point they're going to get tired. People want to feel a connection to a brand. They want to understand, like, what's your social responsibility? What's your environmental responsibility look like? What does your company do to make the lives of people or the world better? Right? In your manufacturing plants that are in Asia, what does it look like? People want to know this stuff, because especially younger generations are becoming more socially conscious. So they want to know, what are you doing to help the environment? And that's where, like, brands like 10 Trees, I think, is a great brand, because every time you buy a shirt, they plant 10 trees. There's an immediate connection for an environmental brand to say, Okay, I can help by buying a shirt, 10 trees, right? There's no thoughts to it. It's just, I know that's going to happen. Or you're starting to see more and more brands like 80% of this product is recycled plastic from the ocean, things like that. This is what is connecting socially conscious younger generations to brands, as opposed to, I just need a new washing machine. Right. That's the other thing, right? Is like some people, really long buying cycle. I'm going to buy a car once every 4 or 5 years. Probably. I don't need your promotion every week of what the new model is because I just bought a car. I'm not buying a new one for a while. Send me relationship messages that go with, you're due for an oil change. Check your tire rotation. Get an alignment. Those types of things. You have to have different streams when you're talking to people. So the 2 advices I would give, consent, and then socially, maybe it's 3, socially responsibility, and then what to actually do with your long purchase life cycle things. Think about different messaging to people once they've actually completed those purchases.
Amen. The gospel per Matt Vernhout on email after hours today. I can get behind it. I really can. And obviously, it's so great, Matt, to have you on the podcast. As Guy alluded to, it's long overdue. But before we wrap up, I do have one more question because I feel like you're so enmeshed in email. It's all day, it's every day, it's everything. And on the theme, what do you think the next anti-best practice might look like? I know we've talked about like a lot of these are rinse and repeat and there's someone new coming in and they just don't know. But what might be a new way to do that? I'm not giving anybody any ideas. I'm just trying to ask.
So all of these tactics that have been tried are just new again. And it's because someone, like I said, someone watched a YouTube video on growth hacking and email and someone said, yeah, these are great. They're really good. Your list is going to explode in size, which is great. But then nobody cares. Right? Your engagement rate is nothing. It's the whole run a contest to grow your list. But then nobody cares because they didn't win the contest. They only got on your list because they wanted to win the contest, but nobody cares. Or, social engagement for email. Right? Get email. Where I actually think people should focus, maybe I can end on a good note. Where I think people should focus and things I think that are good, look into AMP for email or kinetic email. Those 2 tactics, I think will be the next good things in email. And I've been pushing AMP for a long time. I love the idea of interactive messaging where you can flip through a catalog, change the color of the clothing item you're looking at, adjust the size, add to cart direct through your email. You don't have to go to the website. You can then go to the website and check out. I think those types of things are going to be the next big thing in email. The challenge is we're at the chicken and egg stage right now. Not enough people are doing it. Mailbox providers aren't supporting it. ESPs aren't supporting it. If more people start to do it, we can turn the pendulum over and start to see more adoption of these things. And I think that's really an interesting point of view for the future of email. Really should be highly engaged, interactive, dynamic content that is in your inbox, right? Play Wordle in your inbox.
Get some of that sweet, sweet email engagement. And just because we cannot let an acronym go by, AMP, Matt, stands for
Accelerated Mobile Pages.
There you go. So when you're Googling it later, you now know.
AMP for email, like the number 4. There's some really cool examples of that where my previous employer actually did like pick your seat when you check into your airline and get the QR code direct in email. You didn't actually have to go to the website. You could do it direct in your email. You would see the airline outline. You could pick your seat and get your QR code.
Such a good idea.
Like those types of things, I think are the future of email. But until we start to see greater adoption, we're not going to see as much support for them. So right now, Google and Yahoo support them, but only if you're using it in their environment, right? So we're not seeing it in things like Outlook. We're not seeing it in Thunderbird. We're not seeing it in these other clients because people aren't asking for it. But if we start to get more messaging that supports it, and it's that cool factor, and people engage with AMP email, people engage like a lot, like 30% more. And that's why I think it's the future of email.
I agree. I think that gives us a really nice point to finish up on. But Vernhout, this has been such a great conversation today. I think we've said several times, long overdue, but hey, we'll have you back anytime. I think and next time we'll have to block out a couple of hours because it feels like we've still got so much to talk about together.
That is absolutely right.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's been a real pleasure. And Danielle, do we have anything else we need to tell the audience before we wrap today?
just a couple of our greatest hits. So everyone, be sure to tune in next time. Hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And of course, don't forget to visit senderscore.org for more resources that can help you become a stronger sender.
That's right. And listen, I mean, Danielle and I, we just love the conversations we have with our Email After Hours guests. And we're always on the lookout for new people to feature on future episodes too. So if you'd like to come and join us, drop us a comment, ping us on LinkedIn. We'd love to chat and get you in the Email After Hours hot seat sometime soon. Let's hear from you soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
Be sure to tune in next time and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And don't forget to visit senderscore.com for loads more great resources to help you become a stronger sender.
To all you sleepless senders out there, thank you for joining us after hours, and see you next time.